The medical examiner wasn't backing down from prior, or the fact that he keeps saying nothing about Tammy's passing was natural. And we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's back here, Roscoe's on it. Shockingly, he has not taken a bath right now, so we'll just run with that. And my name's Paul. And like I said, we're going to continue our discussion on some of the highlights of the DAYBELL trial going on. And specifically today, we're going to be looking at a few clips of the medical examiner talking about his findings. Now, this is the one that was the secondary findings, after they exhumed Tammy is what I'm getting at. We're going to look at some clips just about that, talk about him, hear a couple of the parts from prior going up against him, trying to prove him wrong, yada, 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 all that stuff. So that's the structure of the video. If you do want to follow Roscoe and I outside here, well, we are on the Insta, on the gram, on Instagram. It's on the screen. Go on, click it, good Lord. Now, let's go ahead and look at that first clip.
What did you determine the cause of death to be?
We ruled her cause of death to be asphyxia.
What did you determine her manner of death to be?
We determined her manner of death to be homicide.
And when you use the term homicide, can you talk about what that means in relation to your office?
Sure. It is different from, for example, how lawyers or police might use that term. For us, homicide is a vital records determination that we make. In this case, we didn't sign the death certificate, but that's the way we use the term. It's a determination of the circumstances surrounding the death, and it means to us that another person was involved in that person's death. It does not imply intent, although it is not excluded either.
So interesting. So first of all, the first thoughts that I have about this are, thank God they took a second look. Can you imagine? Thank God, right? Secondly, I like that he defines, this is what homicide means for us versus what it means for, a police officer, right? Now, we'll hear evidence or testimony, that he's saying, look, this is how he came to this, and this is the findings that we had. And to me, and again, if you follow me or if you're new here, then you already know. Or if you're new here now, you know, but if you follow me, you already know is what I meant to say. I ain't no doctor, I ain't no lawyer. I'm none of that fancy stuff. These are literally just opinions from the sofa with my dog, who is now taking a bath in the background, okay? So I'm not qualified in any of those manners, right? These are just my observations that I talk about here. So from the sofa point of view, listening to him talk about the testimony we're getting right here, I'm like, this is exactly how I envision this evening going down with Tammy, not the other of, oh, she was just sick and this happened and she rolled out of bed in this one story I have, but in the other story she woke me up and did, you know what I mean? So this is the more realistic version of what happened, and let's keep watching.
And when we talk about asphyxia, can you tell the jury what you mean by the term asphyxia?
Asphyxia means that the person was unable to get enough oxygen.
Can there be a number of causes or different means by which asphyxia can occur?
Yes.
Can you talk about some of those?
Sure. You can have asphyxia can result from anything that occludes the airway, either externally or internally. So smothering of any type, anything that blocks the mouth and nose could lead to asphyxia. Choking, anything that blocks the airway internally, whether it's food or something stuffed in someone's mouth or whatever, maybe all of those things can lead to asphyxia. Asphyxia can also result from drowning. Drowning is technically a form of asphyxia. You can also have asphyxial deaths that result from chemical asphyxiants. Carbon monoxide is one of those. Cyanide is another that impair your body's ability to release oxygen to tissues, and so they don't get enough oxygen.
So again, hearing all the things that he laid out there. Now, if this is your first time hearing all this, as far as the evidence and testimony goes, you're going to hear that he kind of breaks these things down and whatnot, because you did hear just in that where he's lists all these different things off. Well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. Chemical, drugs, choking, this kind of thing. So the testimony that he will lay forth, in my little opinion, is that most likely Chad and Alex held her down and suffocated her. The evidence will show bruising, stuff like that. We'll get into that. So another thing that first comes to my mind just listening to this is I'm thinking, what a horrible way to go. In general, like one of my fears is always like basically drowning or something that restricts your airway. But imagine waking up or however it went down to realize that your spouse is suffocating you. And all those realizations of those last moments, not only panicking as your body does what your body does, but the realization of why are they doing this? I can't imagine.
Can you walk us through how you ended up reaching your conclusion that this was the cause of death was asphyxiation?
Sure. So as I was just asked, we didn't find any traumatic injury that would explain her death. We also didn't find any natural disease that would explain her death. Her heart was completely normal. Her lungs were normal, except for some fluid buildup in them. Her liver, kidneys, all of her organs were normal. And so we did not identify an anatomic or pathologic explanation for her death. She did have the only real finding she had, apart from no lethal trauma and no significant natural disease, was some bruising on her arms and one bruise on her chest.
Okay. So much going on here. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the last thing. Some bruising on her arms and her chest. Now, we'll get into that, and they'll go over some of the diagrams that they show, and this is what begins to paint a picture, because he will say these occurred, most likely recently, but then Pryor does a good job, and we'll hear a little bit of him kind of creating some gray zone around the bruises, but nonetheless, I think that the state and his testimony, the gentleman on the stand, outweighs, the poking of holes that Pryor tried to do with that. So they don't find any other thing. You heard that there's no disease, there's no this, there's no that. So this whole thing going on. Oh, she's been so unwell. Oh, she hasn't been this. Oh, she hasn't been that. Because remember, anyone else that testifies is like, well, Tammy, the neighbors got up there. She was fine. We just saw her. She has a new grandkid. She was excited. And then a week later, Chad's here with a new wife. What? You know what I mean? Like, you can piece the story together. Now, I will give, when I say this crowd, I'm talking Chad, I'm talking Lori, I'm talking Alex, all of them. They seem to be pretty good at doing stuff to people and confusing people. Because remember, Tammy was buried. This was natural causes at first. And I'm sitting here thinking, what? How? Huh? Again, Alex, natural causes. You can't tell me that man, I don't care. I would never believe that man died of natural causes, right? It's too convenient is what I'm getting at. So let's keep going.
And then when we get to that point, essentially no findings that will explain the death directly, then there are a limited number of things that can explain a death in that context. One is asphyxia. Obviously, that's what we ruled it to be. And that can be, any number of things that, as I discussed, that can lead to asphyxia. But in this case, we believe primarily was related to some form of suffocation. But other things that can lead to death in that context that leave no findings for us to see would be things like seizures. There are inherited and even acquired forms of heart rhythm disturbances that can lead to a sudden death with nothing for us to see at autopsy. And then obviously drug intoxications don't leave anything for us to see. She did have, as I said, some fluid in her lungs. That's a very common finding in the setting of drug deaths. And one of the reasons that we spent a lot of time trying to evaluate for intoxicants that might possibly have led to her death.
So my thing with this is, listening to him get there and testify and whatnot, I'm like, whoever did an exhaustive secondary overlook of this to make sure this wasn't this, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't this, we didn't find this, let's make sure we didn't see this. So this is where I feel very confident of, and then of course you start piecing together the rest of the puzzle of what was going on and the deaths and everybody, going down the way it did. So I feel very confident with this. And again, I just go back to the very first thing where it's just, it's so scary to think how something like this can be swept under the rug. Imagine how often this happens. You know what I mean? It's frightening. And I'm so glad that there's a voice voice of justice for Tammy, that, this happened, that she's speaking to us from, the grave, and able to say, look, this isn't what it was. Because again, in those last moments, I'm sure her last moments of life were spent in utter disbelief and shock, right? I have no doubt that maybe she, you know how it is, like you might not be feeling well or something like that. She probably wasn't feeling well. Maybe she had a headache that evening, but nothing that was, this going on. Now, Chad could have been gaslighting the whole household leading up to it and knowing what he was going to do. She's very sick for weeks or however long he was doing it. She's not well. She's not well. She's this, she's that, blah, 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 blah. Again, other people will testify that he's talking about her journey is going to be over, this, that, and the other. He was lining this up. He was playing his cards. He knew exactly what he wanted to do.
During Tammy's autopsy, did you find any physical signs of seizure activity?
We did not.
And you reviewed Tammy's medical records, is that correct?
Yes.
Any signs of seizure activity in her medical records?
There's no mention.
Again, all this stuff that Chad has relied upon to be like, oh, it was this, oh, it was that, oh, there's da, da, da. Oh, it could have been. No, absolutely not. The picture becomes much clearer.
Did you see anything that showed irregularities?
No. In those settings, most of the time the heart is going to look normal. And so we would, in any of those settings, we would not expect to see anything abnormal with the heart grossly. Just to look at it, it would look normal. But we also would not expect to see, again, that type of condition manifest itself at her age without some other, if she had, certainly she could have it as an acquired condition at her age. If she had, for example, methadone is very commonly known to do that, but she didn't have any methadone in her system. There are a long list of other medications that can do that. Fluoxetine, which she was on, is also rarely been described as doing that, but she had been on a very stable dose for a very long time, and with no indication that that had been a problem for her.
Again, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, all the stuff that's been insinuated, oh, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. No. This, and I like the fact that he is bringing point to, yes, she was taking this right here. Yes, it could possibly do A, B, or C. But in this particular situation with Tammy, she had been stable and on it for this long. That ain't what's going on, And again, I just wonder what Chad's over there doing, because remember, or what he's over there thinking. Remember, this is somebody who people are testifying at her own funeral. He can't keep the story straight. She fell out of the bed here. I woke up. She woke me up rolling out of the bed here. We found her at this hour, and he's going to testify for different things that the body goes through, as how long she could have possibly been deceased and whatnot. So, again, I come back to this. Now, mind you, whenever somebody's doing something like this, they are a little bit smarter, it seems. I don't know if smarter, conniving might be the right word, of being able to wrangle their way around the first thing. Because remember, it's like she was like, okay, natural causes gone by, barrier, when all this is right there beneath the surface upon second look, okay? So I'll give Chad or whoever that, they were able to manipulate that situation. However, with him, like at the funeral, it's like, keep your story straight, dude. If you're going to do this to somebody, have one story you stick to. Also throwing so much stuff against the wall. Healthy people like this, and yes, I get that healthy people can drop dead, okay? I get it. But in this scenario, all the things he tried to come up with, you can't get blood from a turnip. You know what I mean? And that's what they tried to do with this situation, where people who were not part of it at all, neighbors, people like this, were like, no, she didn't present in any such a way. Like, this was so out of the blue for people, for her to die. And he couldn't wait to bring Lori into the picture. I mean, within days, he's talking about this new wife, and that, I mean, hello, that is a major giveaway as to motive.
Dr. Christensen, on that photo, can you see something coming out of Tammy's mouth?
Yes.
Can you describe what we're seeing there?
Yes, this is foam, essentially. It's what a manifestation of pulmonary edema. You can see running down the left side of her face what looks like blood. Pulmonary edema fluid, as it comes up, is edema fluid is just fluid that leaks into the air spaces when it normally should be contained in blood vessels. And as it leaks into the air spaces, normally there is protein and other things within those air spaces to help keep them open. And as the fluid gets in there, it mixes with that protein and creates this bubbly, frothy fluid, which can then bubble up through the airway and out the nose or the mouth, or both.
Now, I wanted to include that part in here because it's going to become part of a larger conversation. And again, this is the type of stuff, well, let's pause that thought for a second. If you follow Chad or the story and all that, you'll know that he was a cemetery sexton. He wrote the book, we covered it here, One Foot in the Grave, where he's trying to be I'm, the mayor of the graveyard, and I know this and that. However, he's not a doctor, right? So there's things like this that he can't hide, is what I'm getting at, right? Physical evidence of things. Now, again, he can sit here and try and be like, projecting it onto all these other possible scenarios that went down. But here you have the doctor. They're up here. This is the science. This is what this means. This is what this shows us. Let's hear what else he has to say about it.
Can there be several causes of pulmonary edema, or what ultimately causes that, or is it a result from?
Yes, pulmonary edema, again, I think I said previously, is a nonspecific finding that can result from any kind of insult to the lungs. We certainly see it in asphyxial cases. We see it in drowning cases. We see it in the setting of heart failure. We see it in the setting of drug intoxications. Those are probably the primary places where we see it, although really anything that causes respiratory failure can ultimately cause pulmonary edema to manifest in this way, pneumonias and other things.
So here's my question with this that I come back to. So hearing him say this, so he's describing like this is pulmonary edema, or however you say that word, and this is what it is, and blah, 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 blah. And this is where we see it in these instances. And yes, granted, the instances he lists off, there could be other things besides, say a homicide, right? I get that. However, it all goes back to asphyxiation. You know what I'm saying? Like this thing. So I'm like, how do we get this first natural cause, go ahead and bury her? How did we arrive there so fast? With all this other physical evidence that we're hearing and whatnot of just things of this nature, right? So this is the part that just shocks me, is I'm just like, how, and again, you just think, how often does this happen? You know what I mean? Where people get away with doing this to other people.
I think we've gone over this a little bit, but when you did the internal part of the autopsy, did you notice, was there anything out of the ordinary in relation to Tammy's organs?
No.
Was there anything?
Except for her lungs, sorry.
And can you explain what was out of the ordinary with her lungs?
Her lungs were a little bit on the heavy side, heavier than would normally be expected, and had fluid in them. There were also changes related to her prior embalming.
Again, anything wrong with the organ? Anything? Nope, nothing. Nothing at all. Now, Pryor's over there just squirming. He's going to get up and try and do his stuff here in a minute. We'll look at a couple of the clubs. But again, I just wanted to put this up here for those who weren't watching it or whatever, just to show how meticulous is this. We've gone down the list of boom, 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 boom with Tammy. This is how this group operated. They wanted something, and they went after it, and unfortunately for them, it meant getting rid of spouses and children and whatnot. And again, I'll go back to this, where so many people, specifically with Chad, but other people as well, but it really stuck out to me with Tammy's case. Imagine this happening, okay? And then you're going to your neighbors and friends and family who have known you, your children, your wife, your life. And within 7-10 days, you're introducing somebody like Lori Vallow, okay, to the scenario. Talking about, this is my wife. One of the neighbors said that when he brought her over, they were so giggly that they were embarrassed. Giggly and kissy. I'm like, ugh. These are the same people that once Lori was incarcerated, Chad's going to their house talking about, Christ has asked me to come over here and ask you to put your house up to get her out. I mean, can you imagine? Drinketh from the damn cuppeth on that. Okay, cannot roll my damn eyes hard enough. The fact that he did it, convinced himself to go do it, and of course, this is the grift. Christ asked me to come over here and ask you to put your damn house up for glory, Daybell. Cannot roll my damn eyes hard enough. Let's go to the next damn clip before I get sick.
And Dr. Christensen, you can see on this exhibit, there's an R and an L that's been written in. Would you indicate what those represent?
Yes, those simply represent the right and left sides of the body. And at the bottom, I also indicated which was the front and which was the back, although that's fairly obvious.
And then it appears that there have been several dots or markings added. Could you explain what those represent?
Yes, they are not to scale, but they are representations of the locations where we identified bruises.
And on the front, there appear to be 6 dots. Is that correct?
Yes,
And then on the back of the body, 4 dots.
that's correct.
Now, of course, with these, when they put like the little diagrams up and, do these kind of things, it just hits home even more because this begins to tell the story of what she went through. Now, here in a minute, we're going to hear Pryor kind of dissect this or whatever, but keep this in the back of your mind. When he tries to dissect it and be like, well, you don't know really what would cause these bruises and, and like, so you're trying to say that somebody was holding her down. He paints the picture even clearer by trying to debunk the medical examiner. Pryor almost gives you a blow-by-blow moment of how it went down. And I'm just like, we'll get to it in a second. But again, this is what I'm talking about here. I'm like, poor Tammy. She didn't know what came at her, what hit her. She was probably like taken like left field with this, right? And had no clue. Who is this person here? No idea that this was going to happen. And again, like the medical examiner, the science is the science. And when you get into bruises and stuff like that, and they'll go deeper into this, I'm not going to bring all that up here, of like when a bruise forms and what happens and like what your body does basically, post-mortem, these kind of things. I mean, they can sit here and tell you within reason and whatnot. There's obviously some gray zone when these bruisers came about, So this whole thing, we're going to hear Pryor trying to talk about, oh, she bruises easy and this, that, and the other. And that could be true. Okay, that could be true. No one will ever know exactly what went down in that bedroom or wherever, I'm assuming the bedroom, besides Tammy, Chad, and probably Alex. But that tells you all you need to know right there. If Alex was one of the people that know what went down in that bedroom, you know what I'm saying? Let's go ahead on to that next clip.
When you looked at Tammy's body, did you notice any signs of lividity?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury a little bit about what lividity is?
Sure. There are a number of postmortem changes that a body undergoes after death. And lividity is one of them. It's also called livor mortis. It is pooling of the blood, which normally has been circulating through the body under pressure. Once that stops, gravity then takes over and kind of pools the blood in whatever is the most dependent portion of the body, the part closest to the ground. If a person is laying on their back, the areas where it is supported by, whatever, a bed, the floor, a chair, whatever it might be, will not demonstrate lividity, but areas around that will fill with blood, and it makes initially a sort of a reddish purple color that is where the blood is just pooling. It can change over time for a few hours. It's one of the ways we have to look at whether a body has been moved after death, for example. But if once it's there and well established, usually by 12 hours or so, it won't change anymore, and it will stay in the position it was in or that person was in if they stayed in it for 12 hours. If they're moved prior to that time, then it can also move to where a new position. If someone dies, for example, on their back, stays there for a couple of hours and then is rolled to their front, that blood that had started to pool on their back will then start to pool to their front. And over a period of, the next 10, 12 hours or so, depending on how long a person stays in their initial position, if you move them after 2 hours, more of that blood will redistribute than if you move them after 6 hours, than if you move them after 10 hours. And at some point, and at 12 hours is not a hard and fast thing, but at some point that lividity becomes fixed and will not change no matter what position they get moved to.
Where did you observe the lividity on Tammy's body?
It was all on her back, and because she'd been embalmed, it had changed somewhat in color. It was a little bit more gray in color, but the distribution was still very typical.
Now, Pryor will bring up this in the cross-examination of basically like almost this whole concept of, look, you're doing this examination after embalming, and that's, and he's like, even you said that it's not as, ideal. And he's like, well, no, obviously not. And I mean, nobody would argue that. But again, him being able to get up here and saying the lividity, the pooling of the blood was all in the back. This is how it was. And yes, it changed a little bit because of the embalming, but this is this, and then backing up with science. Again, this is where you can start to take Chad's story of, and again, it depends on which version you go with, right? Because there's multiple versions, depending on when, the version that he gave, to the people who showed up at the house, to the kids, to the person at the funeral. There's numerous stories, right? It just depends on which one, but again, the science doesn't lie. And so I think that he was probably, this is what I think happened. Whatever, took Tammy's life and then cooked up a story, right? Who knows what he was able to say, because remember, the son finds her. The son starts off on the phone call, right? I almost would think that Chad made it to where the son would find her. I could see him doing something like that. But I think he cooked that up, and I think he kind of set it up for a while. Very similar, again, if you go down some of these cases that we look at, and one thing that comes to mind is Michael Peterson with the staircase. This is on the notion if you believe that he did take Kathleen's life, where there's the window of time where he's trying to figure out what to do. You know what I mean? Now, it's very different from this scenario, but he's like doing whatever he has to do before he calls 911. There was like an hour or something like that, where I can't remember exactly that time frame now, but I feel like it was an hour or so of unaccounted for time, or when the blood started to dry, whatever. They're figuring out what they're going to do. The same type thing would have gone here, but I would almost argue that in some fashion or some way, he was probably teleporting to Lori, talking about, we can be together now, right? Let's go ahead on to the next clip.
Were you able to come up with any kind of an estimate regarding a time of death in relation to Tammy?
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. It calls for speculation. His previous testimony confirms that. It would just be purely speculative for him to make.
And Your Honor, if I may respond.
Respond, please.
He's an expert providing an expert opinion. He's already said he reviewed documents, he gathered information, he made a determination that rigor mortis would have set in given the description and information provided to him. So he's basing it off the information and forming an expert opinion.
And in response, Judge, he wasn't present at the time. He didn't observe those factors himself. He's relying on what the police have told him. And at this point, he can't make that estimation.
All right, I've considered the objection. I am going to overrule the objection, finding it's proper in the form of an expert testimony. It will be subject to cross, so you can proceed with the question again, Ms. Blake.
Thank you. Based on the information provided to you and your experience, did you form any opinion in relation to a time of death or a time window in relation to Tammy's death?
Yes.
And what did you determine?
That she had likely been dead for at least an hour or two for her body to be described as stiff, but certainly could be much more than that, many hours. But it's unlikely to have been more recent than an hour.
So again, I just think that this is what happened. I think that they killed Tammy. They or he killed Tammy. And then she basically sat there for a while until he kind of, whether it's staged, I don't know if stage the scene is a correct word for it, cooked up a scenario to have happen, something, you know what I mean? But whatever was going to be for we have to make this now pop off and happen. But again, that whole thing of, remember the phone call, I think it was Garth, maybe the son on 911, talking about mom's frozen. She's cold, this whole thing going, that vibe of the phone call, right? Little nuggets like that. And that's usually what happens in these cases that we watch. It's very interesting to me from, I don't know if you say the legal perspective, but when you sit here and you look at the evidence and then you start dissecting it and you put the science behind it, this person said this at this time. Okay, so what does that mean from a scientific way? Like, what does the body do? You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. And you can start to put the story together. And this is where it starts to either add up or fall apart.
Would someone using essential oils or treating themselves with items bought at a health food store generally explain a sudden death?
No.
This part right here was major because remember he's completely trying to insinuate, and by he I mean Pryor, the defense is trying to insinuate like, oh, she used all these different things, she was using all this stuff, almost like it could have been, instead of getting help for all of her ailments, she's using like, homemade, type whatever. No, here we've knocked that out of the water too. They've knocked out every possibility of things that could have happened. I do not see a way around this testimony combined with the testimony of the neighbors and people from the funeral and all this type of stuff. I do not see how he can even think to crawl his way out of this right here, right? The testimony is so damning, and I get some of it's like, I don't know what you would call, if it's character or whatever, but when like the neighbors are getting up there talking about, well, yeah, a week later he was here with Lori, or I talked to Tammy a few days ago and she was fine, then he's asking me to bail Lori out of jail, and what I mean, like that kind of stuff, combined with this scientific evidence right here, I'm like, oh, case damn closed. Now let's listen to Pryor. Remember how I said we're going to listen to one of his things here, him coming back talking about the bruising and stuff like that. Let's listen to one of those.
And what you're suggesting is that Tammy Daybell someone stopped her from breathing, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm confused about is, how is someone asphyxiating Tammy Daybell if there's one person holding her arms?
Objection actually withdrawn.
You can answer.
I wasn't there, so I can't tell you the specifics.
Right. And the other question is that if someone was holding her arms down, how did bruises get on the front of the arm and on the back of the right arm?
You can have bruising on front and back from a grab.
Okay. And then that person would also at the same time be grabbing the lower part of the right arm too at the same time?
Not necessarily at the same time, no.
Okay. And then while they're asphyxiating her, they grab the left arm, and there's only one little bruise on the left arm, right?
There is one bruise on the left biceps, yes.
And then at the same time, somebody puts something over her mouth while they're holding her arms to suffocate her, right?
It could have happened that way.
It could have, right? It's possible. It could also have happened that this wasn't asphyxiation, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. You're firm on this idea that you think it's asphyxiation, right?
I do.
And that determination you made is as a result of just talking to the police and after you did this investigation, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the evidence.
Sustained.
Okay, so you saw me doing this as Pryor's describing it. Literally, as he's describing this, I'm envisioning Chad and Alex holding her down. When Pryor's like, well, so they did this, but then there's a bruise here. And it's like, well, no, think of somebody struggling and the flailing and the this, and one person's holding down and grabbing here and doing this. This is where all the bruising comes from. And it just, here's the thing. In the beginning, where the state says, objection, well, never mind, withdrawn. I don't know if she was doing this intentionally, but I think that for me, I was like, he's getting ready to bury himself. Let him. And to me, he painted the clear picture of how this went down. He put the movements of the bruises down. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how I think it went down. I think somebody was suffocating her and another person was holding her arms. And of course, there's going to be changing and doing this. And maybe you put more pressure here and there's that one little bruise there, but then you have bruises here. To me, it's like these are finger bruises or whatever. Have you ever seen somebody that bruises easily? And my mother bruises very easily, very little, right? And it's huge bruise comes, whatever. So, and he'll bring this up, Pryor will. He's like, there's evidence that she bruised easily, and, you didn't put this in here and that in here, whatever. You've already rung the bell, right? You can't tell me that this is not exactly how everything went down. I get he's trying to debunk it. But one of the things that when we watch these cases and whatnot, and I'll say this and then we'll close things out, is and it's usually the defense, because obviously they're trying to win, freedom or some kind of lesser charge or whatever sentence for their client. There's some things that I feel like don't ring that bell. Do not create the mental image for the jury, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And maybe Pryor felt like he had to do that, but by like bringing that up of, oh, well, one person's holding her down and one person's doing this, and I guess they move this. It's almost like he's answering the questions for like, okay, well, yeah, I guess she was flailing. And so then you did this. And so to me, it's always like less is more for the defense in many scenarios where I'm like, don't create the mental image. Don't say this over here, because it creates something that the jury sees in their mind. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and give hints. Obviously, I want justice, right? But it's just one of those internal things that I always think about. And we usually see it in a lot of these cases where the defense will try and say something that it's just like, I wouldn't want my lawyer saying that. I would not have wanted Pryor to have done that at all. Okay? I would have been like, we don't acknowledge the bruises except for she bruised easily, she did this. But again, there's just this Lori and Chad had this way where they somehow were able to get some of these situations to go undetected. Alex, Tammy, the whole 9 yards. Now, obviously, things like Charles Vallow are a little bit more obvious, right? The children, right? I mean, this kind of a thing. But, even in that, you're not 100% sure just because of the way things played out, I guess you could say. So, that being said, I wanted to just talk about some of that evidence. I know we didn't go over some of the neighbor stuff, like with the viewing it, but, just in conversation. Again, all this goes on here. So, we've heard this. This happens. She gets buried. They exhume the body. They find all this information. Nope, this is a homicide. These are the reasons why. Then the neighbors are all supporting this evidence of, yeah, this is very inappropriate. He's back all of a sudden with this new woman days later, and it just goes on. And then they lied about Lori's children. All of these lies. Again, these are not people. When I say these people, I'm talking Lori and Chad. They would want you to think that they are these spiritual warriors and all this type of stuff. But if they are, why lie about everything? Why lie unless you knew what you were doing was wrong, that you knew what you were doing was evil? Because that's what this is. That's what all of this is. It's pure evil on display. So let me know what you think. Do you think that that's the theory? Like what we've talked about here is what went down with Tammy? If not, what's your thought process on it? I'm going to be going over the Heather Daybell and Chad's mother's testimony next, I do believe. So be on the lookout for that. It might be a couple of days after this comes out, but nonetheless, it will be out. So I do appreciate you watching. If you're still here, Roscoe says thank you. I say thank you. He does ask that you drop some little sofas in the comment section so we have a place to sit and talk about this case and all the other ones we talk about here at the Sofa Squad. And until he and I do meander our way down there, we'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Roscoe on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.